And then I have another separate audio platform I use just in case. Just good to have
I do the same. I
a
do the same.
backup, right? Just in
Yeah, I do
case.
this.
It's like, sometimes the video, well, if the video doesn't work, at least you have the audio and you have 2 copies and
Yeah. I
okay.
actually have a phone that I hook onto the screen. So it looks
Yeah.
like when I look at the phone, it's like I'm looking at the phone and the camera of Zoom.
Oh,
So I record, so you have the audio then in two different places,
yeah.
meaning so then you have good audio because if this flops, then your backup with visual is also there. So just maybe an idea because I do
Do
that.
you have podcast, right? You have a podcast as well?
I have a podcast, but I focus more heavily on master classes. So it's like
Yeah.
our weekly classes. Then I have like two, three live pitches during the week. And then I have my YouTube videos. So I have
Yeah.
over 3,500 videos.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
like I've learned, the do's and the don'ts. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I use Crisp as well because like my 3-year-old's having a blast outside screaming and playing and you can't hear her. So it's great to record
Oh,
meditations even when there's construction work around you or whatever it is
oh,
that's going
very
on. Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I'm just mostly podcasts, so I use Hindenburg Journalist. So
Okay.
it's a great editing platform for when
Mhm.
I put everything together. So, but it's audio only. So the video I'm relying on Zoom. So hopefully it'll be good. But you have
Yeah.
great lighting and I think we're going to be fine. So,
Yeah. Okay,
all right.
great.
So if you're ready, I'm going to hit record in 3, 2, 1. Hi everyone. Oh, no, I'm not.
We
Hold
are
on.
recording.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, I know. I'm using my other platform.
Oh,
So, okay, ready. In 3, 2, 1. Hi everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have a special guest. Her name is Evette Rose, and she is a counselor and author of 19 books, trauma recovery leader in psychosomatics, founder of Metaphysical Anatomy, YouTuber, and speaker. Evette strives to support people in their healing journeys, and she is the founder of Metaphysical Anatomy Technique. Yvette is best known for her work in helping people recover from the trauma of their past, as well as addressing psychosomatic symptoms and freeing them to live successful and fulfilling lives. She's internationally famously known for writing Metaphysical Anatomy, Volume 1, a book of 722 medical ailments and their psychosomatic patterns. And of course, I have that book. And today we are going to be discussing what metaphysical anatomy is. And we're going to do a deep dive on some of the meanings behind some very commonly known diseases. This is going to be such a great conversation because most of you who listen to my podcast, I'm a big believer in the emotional side to healing. And I don't think that we can properly heal unless we really address that. So I'm excited for this conversation. And I just want to welcome you, Yvette. Thank you so much for coming today.
thank you so much for having me and thank you for that warm introduction. I feel quite at home right now.
Good, good. And I think it's very important because of course, I have my copy right here. This is you could see all my little tabs. It's like my little Bible. I often refer to it because most people know I am a holistic nutritionist, but I wish I could change it to whole as in WHOLE, as instead of HOLE, right? Because I believe we need to look holistically at all aspects to our wellness. So I have to ask you, it's very important that we understand how you got on this path.
That is a big question. So I'm gonna narrow it down because I think as you probably know, no one's life story is short, right? We all have our bumps and mountains and Kilimanjaros and islands and everything. So
Yeah.
so what's really funny actually is right off the bat, I never wanted to do what I'm doing today. I never envisioned myself doing this at all. My dream was to become a crime scene investigator, and I wanted to become a lawyer.
Wow.
So much so that I actually studied it. I studied it for 1 year, and then I ran out of money and I had to let it go. But prior to that, I studied business management. So I went back into business management and I worked in the head offices, in these construction, petrochemical, mining, sites and head offices. So very heavily masculine, male dominated. You almost had to have balls, to survive in these environments. It's like there's no space for femininity. So my femininity I discovered, way, way, way back in my life. And so what was interesting was what I didn't realize at the time was the reason why I wanted to become a crime scene investigator and a lawyer was because it was that little girl, that inner child that needed to understand and bring the pieces of the puzzle together of why all the things happened in my life. Who was to blame? Who needs to be prosecuted? Who needs to be brought to justice? Because
Ah.
I never got my justice. I
Mm.
never got my justice. And so because of this, I had a very, very toxic relationship with my dad, and I'm the only child. So whatever it is that happened, whatever it is that was done, it was just towards me. There was no one else to share it with. And my mom was the peacekeeper in the house and always trying to just manage and balance everything. And so my dad was actually a clinically diagnosed sociopath. He was an alcoholic and he was a drug addict. And so people always ask me, well, how do you know that? Because you know how a lot of people just these days on social media just like, well, that person's a narcissist, that person's that. Like everyone now suddenly has the right to diagnose just because they see one symptom. I lived my whole life to see this. And I actually, back in the days when we had, like, we're all over 40s, right? So we all back in the days when we had these cassette tapes, when you would record your favorite song for your
Yes.
friends and make like a happy tape and a love tape. And so I
Yes.
had one of these tapes. I found one and I saw my dad's name, Barry, on it. And I thought, oh, let me just see what's in it. Maybe I can record over it because, the radio was playing all my favorite songs. So I was sitting there waiting to record the favorite song. And then I heard my dad and his psychologist talking. And so I just happened to hit that point where he was diagnosed with this condition. And I had to go there and I went to the library. Back then, we didn't have Google. I went to the library and I looked at what is this? And it's like these pinballs and bing, 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 bing. It all just came together. Now I understood why he couldn't emotionally relate to everything that I'm doing and saying, why there was never remorse, why there was never an apology, why we were speaking two completely different languages. Because let me tell you, to talk to someone who doesn't have the emotional capacity to even grasp what you're saying when you're pleading or when you're arguing, when you're trying to get out of a situation, when you're being beaten up, there's no guilt. There's
Right.
no guilt. And that was tough. And your father holds the position of how we see the world as women. Our relationship with our father determines if our confidence is going to come from a fight space or from a place of confidence and feeling I feel worthy of being received by the world as I am. So if that relationship is broken, it means that you are going to most inevitably become the chameleon and always try to mold and fit in and, bend your boundaries, bend your identity, mold and morph yourself in and out of every different situation. Now, mom is a whole different other story, but I'm talking specifically about dad because that's where the pain point was. He's the reason why I am where I am today. And I'm thankful for that now, but back then I was not.
Yeah.
So he was the alcoholic with the Bible under his arm and always threatening, guard this, psychics are bad. He was part of a church movement where they would even walk down the streets and they would go and shut down psychic stalls. This was like, so this whole world of where I am in now was completely taboo. This was the wiring of my childhood foundation. And my relationship with him was consistently mirrored in my relationships with men. Even though I could see and feel, but this man's violent, this man's drinking, why am I with him? Why am I not leaving this relationship? Is because the familiarity was the core foundation of what I had with my father, because that's what we tend to drive towards. Even though consciously we can see it's not good for us, but we gravitate toward that place of comfort, right?
Yes.
So we learn to feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And because that was part of my childhood foundation, my definition of love equaled abuse. So even though consciously we think we see this Disney story, what you align with and what you feel attracted with is what's going to be the subconscious programming, which is the abuse. It doesn't consciously make sense, but that's how the wiring of the body and the mind works. And this is one of the core reasons why a lot of people don't heal, and why my healing journey was so far beyond extended, is because I didn't heal my underlying associations that I had with love, that I had with health. So many people come to me and they say, Evette, I want to get better. I want to get my health, on track. And I want to get this ailment, rid of this ailment. And I tell them, okay, name the 5 top things in your life that's most important. They will mention everything except their health. And I'm sitting and I'm like, so you want to work on your health, right? How are you going to value it if it's not even in your top 5 right now? You're not going to keep your energy on that. That's why you're not dedicated to losing weight. That's why you're not dedicated to your exercise plan, because you don't value it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we don't value the things that's most important, that we often need to value in order to get better, is because we're in survival mode. We don't see the long-term benefit of how certain things can help us if we just rip off that band-aid, that temporary discomfort, because we've wired our lives around instant gratifications, around coping mechanisms. And these coping mechanisms create more secondary gains along the path, more coping strategies along the path. So it's not just about hitting that root core trauma. You need to clean up these, almost like these neural pathways, these little dendrites. We need to also go and clean up these little, branches
Yeah.
that goes off of the core trauma as well. So this is what happened with me in my path. So as I reached the age of, I was around 22, 23, when I hit my pain point. And when I say pain point, my health was so bad, I ate a choc chip biscuit. This was my diet, coffee and biscuits and chips in the morning, right? After 2 hours of vigorous cardio exercise, starting 4 o'clock in the morning, I was in the office at 8 a.m. and smoking cigarettes. And sometimes my nervous system was so wired. I was so stressed. I would have a shot of vodka just to calm down because the exercise wasn't enough. And I remember I was biting on this biscuit, and this back tooth literally split in half. I literally took half of the tooth out. That is how malnourished I was. That's
Wow.
how brittle my bones were at that age. And for me, that was a wake-up call. I'm like, wow, I don't think this is normal. But this is the lack of awareness, right? Because I didn't value, number one, my health. I was in survival mode. And I was working extremely long hours, and I was fighting a battle with a very abusive partner at that time. And so that's where it started for me.
Mm-hmm.
But what was worse was the depression. It
Mm-hmm.
was this gripping anxiety, suffocating anxiety that I was struggling with. And it started to roll over into a point where you wake up one morning and you just think, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm doing the same thing every day and there's no results. The same goddamn thing. What is the point? And when we all start to hit that place when we ask, what is the point? And you've run and you feel like you've run through all your resources, that's when my thoughts became really dark. And that's when I call it the black depression, because it really feels like there's no way out. And I dropped into a very, very bad suicidal depression. And it got to the point where I woke up one morning and I said to my partner at the time, I said, listen, I don't feel well. I'm not going to go to work. You go and I'll see you later. But that was the morning when I decided to end it. And I left a voice message on my project manager's phone with all my passwords, with all my projects and everything that I was working on. And I was a stellar employee. I was working 3 people's jobs because I made sure that they couldn't fire me, because I moved from South Africa to Australia. I was in Australia at this time. And I didn't want to go back to South Africa. So I gave it my all. And I was holding quite a lot of important roles. And I knew my safety was secured. I would not be sent back to South Africa. And I left the voice message for her. And back then, when we had these big Dell computers with these clunky keyboards, and I remember when he was gone and I had my second shot of vodka, I sat there with my cigarette. I was smoking 30 cigarettes a day at this point, and I smoked there and I typed in, thinking, how can I end this in a very graceful way? I don't like pain. I just want it to be done. And I was so clear in my head. Like there was it was almost like there was nothing that could convince me. I was so clear this was it. But to this day, I don't fully know what it was. But just as I was about to type, and my cigarette was in my mouth, and I remember the ash fell down, and I was sitting there and I'm typing, and I wanted to type how to end it. And then this voice, it's not a clairaudient voice like you're hearing me now. It's sorry, voice. It was a clairaudient voice. It's not a voice like you're hearing me now. Sorry, I switched it. And it said, you're asking the wrong question. You need to type how to be happy and not how to end this.
Mm.
And as I was sitting there, I'm thinking, that's a good point. Because why is other people around me happy? Happiness exists. It's just not for me. So what is it that other people are doing to have access to this? There has to be a way for me. And I think my saving grace was my competitiveness. I'm a very competitive person. If I see someone doing something and I'm like, I want that too, I'm not going to go after what they're doing, but I'm going to see how can I cultivate that in my own private life for myself in my own way. And that part of me now was triggered. And I think for me, that was my turnaround. Because in order for a person to turn around, determination is still needed, but also it's that I want that.
Yes.
I want it. So now it's the question, how much do you want it? And so now there was the carrot and the stick, and my motivation started to lift. And when I Googled that, listen, I went from being raised Christian to being an atheist. And I was an atheist as I was looking at that screen. And you know what came up on my screen? Doreen Virtue, when she was still practicing, right? Crystals, Neil Donald Walsh. And I'm like, is this a joke? I have to do this to be happy? Really, I almost felt offended. And I sat there and I'm thinking, well, I don't have the answer. So who am I now to question what I'm seeing on my screen?
Yeah.
Because that's how unresourceful I felt. And I started clicking and I started, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. So I bought the Neil Donald Walsh books, Conversations with God, and started to go through that and explore Doreen Virtue, explored energy healing. What is this? What is this concept of energy healing? Let me tell you, 3 months later, my life turned around 360 degrees. I gave it my all. And I saw the shifts. I saw the changes. I, as a person, completely changed to the point where I'm like, I'm going to do this full time. I want to show other people how you can turn it around as well. And that's exactly what I did. I quit my job after 3 months. And I remember when I walked out of that corporate doors and I looked back and I'm like, you're never going to see me again. Nowhere around the world are you ever going to see me again. And I made a successful business. I met a business partner, put a few videos on YouTube with the work that I was working on and the intellectual property, and went viral. And we were booked out for years across the world. So my life literally went from being an atheist to 3 months of just absolute determination, just absolute dedication of how did you do that? I wanted to feel the how. And I found out the how, but in my own way, what worked for me, because I noticed certain things work to a certain point and then it stops working. And then we switch, then we look for something else, right? So everything serves a purpose. Every technique serves a purpose. Everything has its place.
Yeah.
So, and this is where, and as I started to travel around the world, that book that you just showed, this is the kids version, but this book, I didn't plan on writing it. I just noticed a lot of people have the same complaint with the same issue, and they go like, did you see Louise Hay's book? Did you see this book? Did you see that book? And I'm like, oh, but it's already done. Why should I do this? And even my ex-business partner said, you're an absolute fool for writing that book. People are going to think you're an idiot. No one's going to buy it. Yeah, straight up, just like that. And I sat there, I'm thinking, okay, well, at least he had a point. And then I asked the question, what did they write about that's missing? What is missing? And so I filled the gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the book is doing so well. Because there's no point in reinventing the wheel. What is your new message? You need to have a new message.
Yes.
And I did that. And so, and then this book was just, I wrote this book because I became frustrated with everyone asking me, "Hey, Evette, so I have this thing in my throat. What does it mean?" The students coming to me, I'm like, I had to keep repeating myself. So I thought, okay, this book started out being as a manual. And then I transformed it into an actual book. Yeah, it was a manual. It was part of a workshop. And so I made a book of it, and I'm like, there you go. I don't want to answer your questions anymore.
So, okay.
Yeah.
It's an amazing story and it is an amazing book. So it sounds like you went through, I mean, I call it the dark night of the soul.
Oh, yeah.
And and often it's where people really come to a realization that their lives really need to change.
Oh, yeah.
So I know I went through that back in my 40s, and it's dark times. It's not fun. And then you start to, but when you start to seek, that's when the healing can begin. And this
Right.
is why I consider myself a lifelong learner. It never ends, and I'm always going to learn something new, and I'm always going to seek other answers. So I love, it's the hero's journey, right?
Yeah.
It's the hero's journey. So I
That's
have
what
to
it is.
ask you about your father. How First thing I think is really important that I ask you, do you think we ever really completely heal, or do the scars just fade?
That's a great question, because at the end of the day, healing is what helps the scars to fade. Because number one, when we start to heal, where's your focus? Your focus is now being solution orientated. Because when we are in a state of problem and pain and distress and wounds, and we're in that place, we're now in the vibration of feeling like a victim.
Mhm,
And it's okay to feel like a victim.
mhm.
That's a very much needed process. We need to go in, because when we feel like a victim, it means I'm acknowledging and I'm feeling and I'm seeing the pain that I've been through, and
Yeah.
I'm honoring this right now. So I'm using the word victim because this is the best word that a lot of people can relate to. We've all been in that place where I call it my pity party. And
Yes.
sometimes when I feel like a victim, and my husband's like, "Why are you like this?" Blah blah. I'm like, "Listen, I'm having my pity party right now, and you're not invited."
Yeah,
Just like that. And I say it in a funny way, but so that he can digest the hand. I need space right now, so that he can digest it in a funny way. But he knows when I say that, I mean it. I
yeah,
absolutely mean it. And this is me now just needing to be in that state of like, I'm feeling my wounds, I'm acknowledging my wounds, I'm being with them right now, and it's okay to have them.
I agree.
But when you stay in that state for longer than 6 months, now you run the course of it becoming part of your identity. Being a victim is meant to be a passing phase, like seasons, just like any other emotion. And it's important that we allow space for that, but it's also important that we don't become stuck in that, because you cannot and you will not heal when you are in victim mode. Why? Because now you are not in your state of empowerment. You can't, because when you are being a victim, or you feel like one, the body is in a state of, I can't. I need to hide. I need
Mhm.
to hibernate. I need to draw within. I need to pull my energy back. The body's not in healing mode. When the body goes into healing mode, it means that the body's now open and ready to be rewired, to regulate itself, to look at new ways of living. It's enthusiastic. It's positive. It feels ready to move towards a solution. So being a victim and moving towards a solution, it's the opposite frequencies. That you can't be. It's either or. That's it. You can't be in both at the same time. So that's why when you feel that you're in victim mode, be in that.
Yes.
But then we need to make a conscious shift. Okay, I feel I'm a bit done with that now. Now it's just holding me back. And when you feel held back in life, when you feel trapped, when you feel things are repetitive, when you feel like I don't want to do this anymore, that's your body saying, hey, I'm ready.
Yes.
Let's flip the switch. Let's now switch consciously to being solution orientated. And that's a very powerful state of mind to be in, because when you're solution orientated, now we start to see the solutions. Now we start to see the possibilities because we're open to it. Because when we are in pity party mode, our energy is withdrawn. Our filters are completely different as well. So the question that you ask is a really good question. The body will only heal. And yes, we can heal, but it will only heal if it feels safe. If you don't feel safe in your life, if you don't feel safe in relationship to the topic that you're trying to address, your body is going to reject the healing. Your nervous system is not going to regulate itself. It only regulates itself when it's healed. That's why when a lot of people who've been through very traumatic pasts, when they have a very calm, a very loving, a very gentle partner, these people heal in that relationship. They actually heal because they feel safe.
Yeah.
Because that other person is learning and teaching them that it's safe to be you. It's safe to be in a state of distress. It is safe to express. So safety is one of the core key factors in order to really, truly heal, where there can be a subconscious memory of the distress, but the nervous system, the body, and the physiology of the body doesn't react to it anymore. Is it 100% clear? I personally don't think so. I think you can get it down to at least 80%, maybe at least maybe 90%, but to the point where you feel at peace, where you feel contentment. That for me is the place of power. Because let me just quickly also touch on this very briefly, because this is important. If you have a certain trauma that you experienced that maybe triggered a certain ailment, and that emotion that you within you dealt with, right? Now you brought it down, the trigger of that. If you can do it so well that you continue to pass on the solution to your future generations, at least to 100 to 200 years, you can really truly switch that epigenetic switch off.
Yes.
You can switch it off.
Yeah.
And research has shown this. Dr. Gabramati, I think he was, I don't know if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's even the one that, that touched briefly on that. I'm taking this now to a bit of an extended level, but I think he was the one that briefly touched on that. And there's so much power in that, because we as a species, we're actually solution orientated. Why? It's a survival response. Despite the fact that we're negative bias, we're still solution orientated.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. I think you're right about Gabor Mate. And then there's other aspects to that about generational trauma and
Yeah.
how, I or my what is it? My mom. Now I would have been in the womb of my grandmother as one of the eggs in my mom, right? Because at 4 months as a
Yeah.
fetus, we already have all of our eggs, right? So that would mean part of me was in my grandmother. And so what you're saying, you're right. It has already been proven. And I don't know if you know Mark Woolen. It didn't start with you. He talks about generational trauma. And I find it all very fascinating how, we can really do the healing ourselves. But I want to get back to this whole subconscious side because you kind of touched on it.
Mhm.
And I find it really fascinating because what is it? 80 or 90% of our thoughts are subconscious. Is that right? Something
Yeah,
like that?
about I think they said about 90,000 thoughts are subconscious, and then about 70,000 are repeated the next day. But the ones that are repeated the next day are not often the negative ones, because we're so negative biased. So it's constantly being filtered from the negative perspective, right? Because that's what we often get hooked on. It's that sad negative feeling. It's being carried over into the next day. And then what happens? You're in that negative state. Your RAS, your reticular activating system, is then set to look for things that will align with how you feel, including people and circumstances. That's why you can't even see that this, oh, look at that beautiful sun. Look
Yeah.
at these kids laughing and playing. That is so wonderful. You can't even take it in because your RAS is now focused on filtering in and out
Yeah.
what it is that your subconscious mind is focused on. So
So
that's
it
powerful.
it is because so I have done a lot of work on helping, I guess, clear out some subconscious beliefs. I can talk about one of mine. I don't have a thyroid, and I had thyroid cancer when I was 41. So my
Oh.
subconscious programming, and this is programming that came, we know thyroid is the master gland for metabolism. I've always been a very, very small person, and my subconscious programming was, well, now I'm going to just gain weight. I'm going to get fat. I'm going to go through menopause and I'm going to get fat. And I actually had to do a lot of work on that because it was
Mm.
almost like it was programmed within me. So, is that where metaphysical anatomy comes in? Where you can kind of tap into some of those programs that are maybe causing you to vibrate at a certain level. It's kind of like what you're saying.
Absolutely. So here's the thing how I see this with the people that I've interviewed and worked with. We have thoughts. Now, thoughts is not the problem. It is if you have an underlying unresolved trauma that is in resonance with a negative thought that you have, which now blows it up and empowers it. That's why some thoughts are fleeting and others, like, boom, they stay and they stick and they become stronger and they become, more ingrained. So did the trauma cause the thought, or did the thought come and now exasperate another trauma? It can go either way. It's not always, for me, from my personal experience, always, 100% connected. It depends on the person. So it's really about looking at the thought, which also now could be showing the distress that you were going through at that time. You were not in your most empowered state, right? I can only imagine, if I were you, I would feel, for example, vulnerable. And so when we are in that state of disempowerment, or maybe feeling challenged, maybe feeling sad, feeling stressed, negative thoughts are, of course, more likely to come and exacerbate
Mm,
certain prior unresolved traumas, which could be perhaps maybe the reason why the ailment was there, meaning the psychosomatic side of it. So all of this, as an example, I'm completely making up a hypothetical right now of how
yeah.
it could potentially work. But I do hope that that helps. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think that, uh, that's interesting. It's almost like you're saying, we have all these like thoughts, but then if because you know how it is, like, I don't know about you, Yvette, but like I totally have monkey brain. Like my brain's going a mile a minute all the time. But if there's a trauma that's actually associated with that thought, that gives it power and it gives it that vibration. That makes actually a lot of sense what you're saying.
That's because that's what it anchors it in, and it makes it feel more, and then the physiology of the body now starts to really truly react because there is an actual memory that it's anchored into. So that's why a thought can become and start to feel so physical. Like the anxiety, the heart palpitation, it can trigger the survival responses.
So, you talked on victim consciousness. I have to say I really agree with you. So, not that I have to, but when you say sometimes we need to go through it and we need to
Yeah.
move through that phase, I totally resonate with that. But there's a lot of people who can't get past it. So, here's an interesting concept. So I talk a lot about the snowball effect, right? You know how everybody's met that one person, it's like there's always a disaster going on in their lives,
Yeah.
right? Like we've
Yeah.
all met
We'll
those
have them.
people. Right. And you're like, "Oh my god, is anything ever good? Is anything ever okay?" Is that because it's like, I guess it would be, you mentioned safety. Maybe that person's not feeling safe. they have a lot of these traumas, they're vibrating low. Like, I don't know, like what causes that?
A really great question. Now, the challenge that I've seen, because when I wrote these books, and I thought it was 6,000, it's almost like 7,000 people that I've interviewed and worked with now. And what I noticed the pattern with them is that there's a subconscious addiction to the cortisol. There is an addiction to needing the stress in order for them to perform and to act. Because when we go into that state of distress, it's almost like you go into a high. And especially when you're in that state of distress and you overcome the challenge, it releases dopamine. So what we're actually becoming, addicted to is to dopamine, but through a toxic channel. Instead of dopamine, maybe through food,
Oh.
which is another toxic channel. But this toxic channel of the adrenaline can actually, your thoughts can kill you at the end of the day, because when you're in that state of distress, what's happening? Your immune system is under distress, and all this energy is being pulled from the immune system. So now comes all these viruses and bacteria, and they're having a party in your body because the immune system's like, I'm too tired to deal with you. And then we get sick. So this is another example of people who, the disaster, it might look like a disaster to you. They might, say, oh, but this is so bad, this, that. But internally, there's a part of them that feels very comfortable with this discomfort. There's a part of them that's very happy feeling unhappy, because that's their association. That is the connection that they made with the state of distress. And also, normally what happens is when a person starts to grow up in a household, and that foundation is always stressful, it's very hostile, that cortisol, that state of distress, actually makes a person feel safe, because then you're ready to act and react at any given time. These people will go into an absolute state of panic, full-blown panic. If you have to put them in a calm and relaxing environment, they might sit there and go, oh, this is nice. But maybe after 10, 15 minutes, it's going to hit them. And the panic is actually going to increase, because they don't know how to feel safe feeling safe.
Mm.
They
Wow.
don't know how to feel safe feeling safe.
Mhm.
They don't feel safe to relax. They don't feel safe to feel happy. Why? Because now I'm in the opposite frame of mind of being of the normal state that I'm used to, that could save my life, that can help me to achieve my goals, that can help me to feel like I am alive. Now I'm cut off from my dopamine, because the wiring of dopamine is not set to be achieved through relaxation. It's been set to be achieved through stress.
So it's an addiction. It's an addiction to feel that way.
Consciously, yes. It's not like someone who consciously maybe now starts to take drugs and then boom,
Yeah.
now it becomes an addiction. But it's like the body starts to look for that access point to the dopamine. So what do I need to do in order to get to that? Chaos, drama. Who's going to give it to me? All these toxic people, all these
Yeah.
toxic circumstances.
Do you believe that when you're in that kind of a state, you can subconsciously bring, okay, we know you talked about the illness. That's like what your book is about, right? But can you bring accidents and other things about when you're vibrating in that state? What do you think?
So that's a really great question. So from what I've seen with people who are in car accidents or they're accident prone, is that often what happens is maybe they had an argument with someone the day before, or they had a certain negative thought, and it makes them actually feel destabilized. You'll see every single time when someone had an accident, something destabilized them. Your
Mm.
focus is not where it needed to be. Because if it was, most things maybe could have been avoided. Now, I understand sometimes freak accidents happen. There was absolutely nothing that
Yeah.
you could do about. Now, I'm not referring to that, just to be absolutely clear. But sometimes when you ask people how they felt on the morning of the accident, there was a sense of something that destabilized the inner equilibrium.
Mm.
Something caused them to feel off balance. And in a lot of cases, I've seen negative thoughts. Now, we all have negative thoughts on a daily basis. So why is it that a negative thought can cause me to have that? when the body has reached its threshold for dealing and handling with this negative thought. You can have a negative thought on quite a regular basis, but have you noticed on some days that negative thought just hits you and it hits you hard? You
Mm,
almost feel like you emotionally just tumble into an even worse place because of that one thought that you have on a regular basis. That's when I'm referring to the threshold that the
mm,
body has to protect itself or to deal or to handle or to reminisce with a certain negative thought and the emotional distress that it brings up, right? It becomes exhausting. It's exhausting to have negative thoughts all the time.
it is.
That's why we have fatigue. That's why we have adrenal burnout. That's why you get the flu.
So, what about grief? Where does grief come into all of this? Because, we're talking about like kind of our vibration. Like, I'll tell you, when my dog passed away, I like, there's people who don't have pets and they don't get it. But when you have a pet that is always there, and I'm a big believer that they really help to absorb energy for us. Like, I feel like they're very spiritual creatures. Now, when I lost my dog, I was in a state of grief for a very long time. It
Yeah.
was hard for me. So, does that mean I'm, vibrating lower? Does that mean I'm more prone to illnesses or accidents or things like that?
There's a possibility, and the reason why I would say that is because look where your focus and awareness is. It's with the
Yeah.
grief. It's being pulled away from other areas of focus. That's why it's hard to heal when you're in a problem state, when you are in problem mode, because it's pulling all your focus and your energy there. In order to heal, our focus and awareness needs to be more expanded in order to be open to receive possibilities, to receive people and circumstances, and to align with solutions that we can resonate with, and to recognize the resonance of that in order to feel drawn to that. So absolutely, and I so deeply relate to what you said, because when I was 29, I had a German Shepherd that was only 6 months old, and I had to let him go. And I fought so hard to keep him alive. He was just born with such bad genes. But that dog opened up my heart. That
Mm.
dog showed me what it felt like to love and to be loved. And when I had to let him go and I was holding him in that vet, and when he gave his last breath, I had a heart attack. That is how severe my grief was. And here I'm in the car off to the to the hospital because I
You
couldn't
actually had a heart
process.
attack?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
Yvette.
From grief. From grief. And this is a
Oh,
medical term as well. It's called the broken heart.
yes.
Yeah, it's a medical term. This is a fact. And it was so severe, and it took me, I think, this happened in 2012. I think it took me a good 9 years to
Oh
really
gosh.
fully let go of that,
Yeah.
to really truly talk about it now and not have a breakdown.
Yeah.
Right? Do I feel the sadness coming up? I feel it right here now, but it's healed now to the point where I feel content to talk about it.
Yes.
Because when I looked at what did this dog give me that I couldn't have in my life without it? Safety and love. Safe love. And what was funny and interesting is the dog was male. Safe
Oh,
masculine male
interesting.
love. Yeah. Took me
Oh,
a while to put it together. And then when I started to heal the distress of the absence of this in my life, meaning my father, because biologically we're actually wired to look for that masculine safety because the father is the leader. When you look at the history of our ancestors, the father is the source of protection. We're biologically wired to connect our source of safety to that.
mm.
The father is absent, of course, then the mother takes that as a substitute. But when I started to tap on that, that's when the grief started to lessen, and more and more and more lessened.
When you became
Because
aware, right? You're saying you became,
aware of that, but I also healed. I started to really consciously now heal the absence, because what I realized is that was the grief that I felt for the dog was the grief that I also had for not having the father that I needed to have. And when I tapped on that, it had this dominoes effect into really fully healing the grief of losing that dog. That dog was such a catalyst in my healing. And I believe that sometimes humans, people that we have soul contracts with, our soul family can come in the form of animals, because I will never forget this. I had a dream about that dog sitting in the bathtub and then suddenly transforming into a human being, into a man with black hair that I looked at from behind, and then became the dog again. And I woke up that morning, I'm thinking, this was before I believed in any of this, right? I didn't believe in this at that point.
Yeah.
I'm like, what was that about? And that same day, the dog came into my office, which he's never done before. And he sat on my chair across from my desk. And he jumped on and he sat there like this. And he just looked at me for 5 minutes still. And then jumped off and he walked out. And I'm like, now, if some of you might sit there and wonder, well, what's the significance of that? Like, he's never done that. That's
Mm.
a chair that my clients would normally come and sit in. And he's never done that. And just that night, I had that dream. I feel so many signs were around me. And this was also the catalyst, because that was when I was my ex-husband at that time, which was not a healthy relationship. And all this just started to come together. And as I healed this, that marriage fizzled out and everything just, it was this complete catharsis collapse of
Mm.
everything that I had and owned when I started to heal that. Because everything that I felt drawn to became extremely unattractive.
So, do you think that, okay, we kind of touched on the victim consciousness when you're in that state, it's almost like you have to be there for a while and then you kind of open up. You start to open and you start to see signs that you would have not seen before.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
absolutely, because your filters shift. I went from feeling like a victim to feeling more stronger, more empowered. And when you start to move into a state of empowerment, you start to, a lot of people, when they do that, they notice that they start to feel angrier. They start to feel more irritated. They go like, oh, this healing is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
No, what's uncomfortable is you needing to start to feel comfortable with your boundaries, because that anger is showing you how much your boundaries have been overstepped. It's showing you how your threshold has been hit again and again and again and again. And that anger is there to show you it's enough. Stop it. It needs to come to an end now. Now we need to take action and turn it around and change it, and not just passively sit there and observe. So this is something that I started to notice also in my own healing journey as well. When you have had a low self-esteem your whole life, if you had poor boundaries, all of this is suddenly going to start to feel really uncomfortable. It's going to feel uncomfortable to ask for what you want. But there's a part of you that's going to feel like, I need to say this, but I feel uncomfortable. There's a part of me that needs to say this, but I feel uncomfortable. Entertain that part of you that needs to say it. Be okay with feeling uncomfortable,
Yeah.
because it's normal to feel uncomfortable diving into a certain new area that you've never explored before. It's normal.
I know with the thyroid, there's a lot of connections to not speaking your truth, not, a lot of people know this about the thyroid because it's your throat chakra, right? So now look what I'm doing. I'm a podcaster. I'm like, whereas I grew up in a very strict Eastern European background, I have very loving parents. I'm grateful for that. But it was always being, you don't say this, you have to be proper. The family is always like this.
Right.
You don't talk, what is it? Like, talk about things that are private matters. And
Yeah.
now I talk about everything, Yvette. Like, and I'm living and speaking my truth. But I guess, you might have a different person and personality where speaking your truth didn't matter. But to me, it did.
Right.
So, kind of being closed off, well, you can probably say that might be one causative factor.
Yeah. Exactly. And the thyroid's also about what I cannot control.
Oh, yeah.
Feeling always in a state of loss of control and having to fight for control. That's also the thyroid. That's why you have a lot of people with thyroid problems also having adrenal problems.
Yes, I did. I had oh,
Yeah.
yeah. But that's where it
Oh, you
began.
did? Yeah, you see,
Yes,
this is it's
yeah.
almost for me, it's a given. When someone has thyroid, I know, okay, how's your adrenals doing?
No, you're
Yeah,
right, because it
yeah.
was the adrenals, postpartum after my second child was born. That's where things started to
Right.
happen, but what I didn't mention, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer 1 year before me. Exactly, almost exactly.
Wow.
So when you say the loss of control, I think that's an understatement because I didn't know what to expect. She's fine now, by the way. She's great.
Yeah,
She's
I was
great.
hanging there. I'm like,
No,
okay, I'm
she's
really happy
great.
to hear
She's
that.
great. She just finished her
Okay.
first year university. She's great. Um,
Congratulations.
yeah,
That's wonderful.
she was 5 at the time. So that loss of
Wow.
control was very difficult for me. And I think,
Yeah,
it's not to say that thyroid cancer developed in 1 year. I had thyroid and adrenal issues way before
a
that.
long
It's just
time.
that
Mm,
what caused it to erupt, really,
right.
maybe that
The straw
year.
that broke the camel's back, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, can you define for us what is metaphysical anatomy? Like, what is that term? What does it
That's
mean?
a that's a great question. So when you look here at the book, so the title meta, right? So meta means that space between you and I. It's that space of intelligence where things happen that we can't always explain, but we know it's happening. As an example, have you ever seen someone sitting there? You can't see their face. Nothing about them can tell you anything about them,
Mm,
but you feel, ooh, something is not right.
yeah.
Well, how do you know that? How do you know that? This is the transfer of information between you and that person that is telling you that. This is our ability and our capacity of how beautifully and deeply connected we are to our environment, how we're reading messages, how the body's responding to its environment constantly, nonstop. We're doing this subconsciously. It's a survival response. We don't realize that we're doing this because, in order to know how we're constantly responding to and feeling to our environment, means that we need to have a certain level of sensitivity to our emotions because our emotions is connected to our intuition.
Mhm.
If you sit there and you say, well, I can't feel my intuition, it's blocked, I'm not one of these special people, well, that's nonsense. That doesn't exist. We are all intuitive. What you can do, what you're challenged with, is feeling your feelings. Why? Because in order for you to understand and interpret an intuitive message, you need to be able to feel your sensations, because whatever your intuition is maybe picking up on from your environment is flooded back through your cells, through your neurotransmitters, and it's signaling certain messages and chemical messages to the subconscious memory and the physiology of the body. So it's now looking for resonance and memories that it can tap into to activate, so that you can formulate a message based on this external data. So if
Right.
we don't have a sensitivity to that inner relationship of the body and to be able to feel these sensations, also called our six senses, how are you going to interpret what you're feeling? A lot of people often feel anxious, and they're like, what is this? What is this anxiety? Is it
Yeah.
now maybe an unidentified fear that my environment triggered around me? Am I maybe feeling the atmosphere in a room? Because you walk into a room and you can feel, whoa,
Yes.
this doesn't feel good. Well, how are you doing that? This is now exactly what I'm trying to say. Your body is feeding and always connecting to what is going on in its environment, to these particles. I'm going to keep it simple for today's topic,
Yeah.
to these particles. And it's reading that. And the electromagnetic field is pulling all this data back to you. And it's being deciphered. And then you interpret it into a message based on your prior experiences.
Mm.
So I hope that that
It
helps.
does. It does.
Yeah.
And you're gonna laugh, Yvette, because you're saying you have to kind of be in touch. with your feelings. And my husband is kind of more of a closed off person. And I'm more open and
Right.
very much intuitive. And so I've gone and taken like a selenite and put it on his heart. And I'm like, I'm opening up your heart chakra, whether you like it or not. And I think he's starting to kind of come more my
Right.
way because
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, closing things off is never gonna help you in life. If you I mean, you can't run down the street screaming your head off all the time, like, I mean, but to be in touch with how you're feeling, I think is so important.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
We're wired to not feel because when we feel the discomfort, we try to get away from it. So we've
Yeah.
literally learned and based our lives on taking action to move away from how we feel. So now it's habitual to not feel. It's like an automatic reflex. And that's why it's harder to come back to feeling. Your emotions, as I always say, is the GPS of your soul. That is what tells you where you need to go. Do this, do that, don't do this, stay away from that person. But all coming from a healthy
Mhm.
signaling instead of this toxic negative wiring and programs that we formulated during our childhood, during our later years in our adult life. And we can navigate through that, but we have to feel comfortable with feeling again.
Mhm.
Because we think feeling is just, it's traumatic, it's bad. No, it's not.
Yeah.
So it's just rebuilding the relationship with that.
So I have to ask because I have interviewed you. I don't know if you know Dr. Bradley Nelson, the emotion code. Do you know him?
No, I have not. No.
So he does a lot with clearing how like emotions within the body can be
Mhm.
stored and then it can start causing you pain. So it's not
Mm.
really the same but similar. And do you know Julia Cannon, Dolores Cannon's
I've heard
daughter?
of Dolores. Yes, I've heard of
Yeah,
her, but
so
I do not. I'm not fully familiar with her work.
a lot of it is similar. Do you and then there's Michael J. Lincoln, Messages of the Body. No? So
No.
a lot of these people talk about emotions. Like this isn't a new concept, but I
Right.
don't think I've ever seen such a comprehensive book like yours,
Right.
where it's
Okay. Well,
kind of
thank you.
all in one. But here's the big thing. I'm like, okay, so let's say I'm diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Let's say like how do I even start to do the work? Like it's almost like it's too late. I'm already sick. I've already got something. So what you teach is more to do the work hopefully before you get sick, right?
That is correct, but it's also designed to help people after the fact.
Right. So like how how do you even begin?
Mm. That's a really great question. So, first of all, it's important to understand when we specifically work with cancer, what I normally ask the person is what was a theme in your life 7 years prior to the cancer taking place? So that 7 years backwards needs to be thoroughly investigated to see has there been any repetitive patterns because I look for repetition because that's where the body hits its threshold is when it goes to a certain level of repetition and it can't uphold or handle or deal with or digest that repetition anymore, and then it's when it collapses. Right,
Mm,
that's when the body starts to have the ailment. Depends on the emotion that you're feeling, that will tell you which part of the body is going to become problematic. So because specific emotions are held in different parts of the body. So that needs to be established as well. Because sometimes what I've seen is why a lot of people's ailments they heal, but then they become sick again, is because there's certain different emotional elements that's connected to maybe one issue. So maybe it can be resentment, which is normally famously known for cancer, but it can also be let's say there's an issue where you feel very deeply unloved. Now, that feeling of unloved, it can be in the heart, but it can also be in the solar plexus.
mm,
So now what's happening is that let's say you address this feeling of resentment, but the feeling of feeling unloved, that emotion hasn't been addressed. If this continues to be stay problematic and to feel challenged and to be triggered by the environment, maybe something now can start to manifest in the stomach area. Now it can maybe turn into a stomach ulcer, right? Or you
Mm.
might have stomach problems, or you might struggle with a lot of bloatedness. So it's very interesting how one issue might be resolved, but how it can actually move into becoming something else if the full package has not been addressed.
Mm. So how does one address it? Like, for example, I know
Right,
me when I'm in that lower state, I meditate. I feel I just need to go quiet. For
right.
me, when I go quiet, that's when I start to get some answers. I'm also a writer, so I write and I journal, or I write, just write, and these things help me. What tools do you help people with? Because
Good.
writing doesn't
Yeah,
resonate with everybody. For me,
yeah.
walking in nature with my other dog that I have, that's really, really important for me. And then I get some clarity and I might seek something else. So, what
Yeah.
tools do you provide for or as guidance?
So that's a great question. So normally what I actually have is a 2-day workshop called Metaphysical Anatomy Technique, also the mind body formula. So it's in this where this is where I compiled all this research where we work with the electromagnetic field in the body, because it's this
Mm.
field that is charged with these negative emotions, and depending on the negative emotion that you're consciously or subconsciously energizing, that's causing a disruption in the communication and transmitters of the nerves and the neurons in the all throughout the body. That now needs to be addressed. That needs to be shifted by learning and understanding how to connect to the body in a safe, gentle way, and then how to shift also that blocked energy. So
Mm.
we do that through by learning how to retrain, how to shift and work with your ability to focus, and how to set intentions as well. And we have tremendous success with this. And then in that workshop also we talk about, and I teach people through 4 levels of breath work. I love my alpha brainwave state, which is breathing in the mouth, out the nose 13 times. And that also helps to reset and to regulate the nervous system. So it's all about tapping into different parts of the body and then bringing it all together that helps the body to release in a safe way. Because remember how I said the body's not going to shift if it doesn't feel safe. And then
Yes.
we also address the negative beliefs that we formulate through subconscious decisions that were made throughout our life, because sometimes even these subconscious decisions is the problem in itself. So the technique is then designed to help people shift the biology. We go back into the womb when you were in the womb of your mother, and to shift the trauma transfer that took place there as well. We dive deeply into addictions, and we have a lot of success with pain as well, with just this simple method.
That's
So that
amazing.
is normally what I do with people. So what if anyone that's listening right now, to give you something right now, what I love to tell people is to bring your full focus and awareness to the area in your body where you feel the challenge. And imagine you're giving yourself in that area space, because it's so condensed and so congested because of the rigidity and the stress that we hold. It needs space. Open up that space. Imagine that there's a light and it's just growing bigger and bigger and bigger, almost until it bursts. And then go into the alpha brainwave state. And when you do the alpha brainwave state, breathe in the mouth into the area where the challenge is. And then imagine breathing from that area out the nose. And do that 13 times. It's very powerful. Yeah.
Actually,
So
yeah,
there's
I love.
something that people can take away. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. I do like different forms of breath work. And, yeah, I try and coach my kids like whenever they're stressed or whatever. Teenagers don't listen so well, let me say. But,
Yeah.
they'll
I'll
learn.
find
They'll
out
learn.
soon.
They'll find out. Yeah, when they're younger. I mean, when I was that age, I didn't listen either. So, cancer. We talked about cancer, resentment, I think anger. I think you mentioned anger in here. Um Heart disease. That's another really common one. What are some of
Yeah.
the underlying causes for that emotionally?
So unprocessed grief, inability to receive love that you have in your life because of how unsafe you feel with it, and also your territory, constant invasion of your personal space or your territory or your home, or emotional invasiveness. People
Ooh.
always think because the heart's give and receive. Well, that doesn't even scratch the surface.
Interesting. What about autoimmune diseases? Because they're so common now, whereas when we were
What it,
younger,
who who is meant to love me is the one who is attacking me.
ooh,
Yes.
yes, because
Where
the
I'm looking
body is
for love, that's where I feel attacked. Where
oh,
I'm looking for safety, that's where I'm feeling attacked.
very interesting. So we have almost like an epidemic of autoimmune diseases
But the
nowadays.
autoimmune disease is also connected to our relationship with our mother and how emotionally available she was as well. It's not always the case, but that's another element to add to that I noticed in all these interviews that I did.
So fascinating. I mean, I love to dig deep on all this stuff. Now, I have to ask this because I wrote it down to make sure I don't forget to ask you. You mentioned trauma, we talked about it, and you also mentioned how, how initially you can't even talk about it. You can't talk about it. Do you believe that when you can talk about it, that you have healed?
Depends how you
Without
feel when
breaking
you're
down,
talking about it.
without, like, losing it, I'm
Yeah.
talking,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, you
No, but
know?
look what you just said without losing it. For me, it's about how do you feel when you talk about it? If you can feel at peace and safe, remember, I keep bringing it back to safety. If you can feel safe and talk about it, job well done. That's a job well done. If you can talk about it and you still feel maybe shaky or a little bit upset, well done. That is still an absolute milestone. But I think what you really truly would like to have is to not have that charge. Because if you don't have that charge anymore, you also know that subconsciously your environment is also not triggering biochemical messages in the body that's related to the subconscious memories of this trauma. Sometimes that happens. We feel anxious, we feel bad, we feel upset, and we have absolutely no idea why. That in itself is draining. You're losing vital, very important energy. So, from my understanding and my personal experience and what I've seen with this, if you can feel safe, you know that your body is conserving energy in a very healthy way now.
Okay, let's give a little example of that because I always like to give an example. So, if I am talking about the passing of my dog, of course, I can still get emotional about it. I
Of
definitely
course.
can. But I don't have that fear, that anxiety, like my other dog's gonna get sick and die, and it's like that unsafe feeling,
Mm.
right? I
Mhm.
don't have that, and I can
Mm.
still talk about my dog and get emotional, but, I've come to terms with everything, and I know her purpose in our lives, and, I'm almost grateful for what she
Yeah.
brought to our family. So,
Yeah.
would you say that that's healed?
That's a great question. The fact that this is a physiological response tells me that there is still perhaps a wound. However, this can be what I would call maybe an intellectual wound. Because now what happens is with this is a very common issue with grief, why a lot of people feel like it never ends, is because when the person or the dog or the animal or the pet passes, that initial shock, we associate that person or that pet with that grief. So
Mhm.
even though you might heal, there's almost like an intellectual neural pathway that still links back. When I think of that person or animal, it triggers the grief that you associated with them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can release just the association of grief with that person or pet, you'll notice yourself actually feeling that you're eliciting positive feelings when you
Mm.
think back to them.
Mm. I maybe have some work to do.
Even work. It's not even work. It's more maybe just a simple mantra that you can meditate on now, just if I would love for you to experiment with this.
Okay. Okay.
At nighttime, when you meditate,
Yeah.
I acknowledge the difference between mention the dog's name and grief.
Ah,
Just disconnect the animal or the person with the emotion grief, because we associate their passing with grief. You see?
I totally see what you're saying. So
This is
you're
yeah, this is
saying
what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Sadness is a
consciously,
normal
conscious,
feeling. You can't avoid that.
yeah, but you're saying consciously disconnect grief with my dog.
Yeah. It's just a conscious realization that this person leaving their existence, it shouldn't be connected and associated with grief. How are you going to remember all the good times? Because
Yeah.
every time you think of the good times, you're going to feel sad. This is where I'm saying this is a healthy approach to take. Now, I would say dive into this approach maybe 3 6 months or even after that, after the initial grief. Allow yourself to go through what you need to go through. That needs to be honored. Crying and grieving is a natural healing response in the body.
Mm,
It's normal to cry. We're designed to cry to help the body to complete that cycle, to release that distress and the shock and everything that took place.
yeah. Yeah. I am, this has been such a great conversation. Now, you have a number of workshops. I did join one of your I don't know if it's a workshop. Like I mean, I have to dive in a little bit more, but let everybody know because you've got such an amazing amount of resources.
Oh yes, so so the two things that I think most people would love is one is the trauma decoded, unveiling hidden messages in the body. So that's a fun 1 day workshop where you can come and literally learn how to read the body like a book without needing the book. So there I teach you how to do remote viewings, distant healings, how to really truly connect to the body and understand when certain things come up and how to read and how to interpret it. This is reconnecting back to our intuition
Mm.
and understanding psychosomatic messages. And then I have the 2 day workshop, which is the metaphysical anatomy technique, the body mind formula, which is where I teach you how to connect to the different parts of the body and how to release that. So a lot of modalities might say, well, you need a technique for thoughts, you need a technique for trauma, you need a technique for this, that. In MAT, it's one technique for all,
Mm,
for everything. There's not this scattered approach all over the place because the body is not that complicated. When you have a negative thought, you need to go look at underlying trauma because it can even be an inherited trauma. It can be a trauma transfer from someone else that you know, that you deeply love. We can actually have that.
mm,
You know how people say, well, maybe it triggered something in me. Well, not always. So these are all very important points that is everything is addressed with one tool.
amazing.
So pain, addictions, emotional trauma, negative beliefs, whatever it is that needs to be shifted or elicited, it's just this one technique and process. So it can be used for absolutely everything. And then I have, of course, the levels can go up. And then we also have our live healing retreats in Bali.
Oh,
Yeah, so we
oh, I
have
want to
regular
come
healing
see
retreats.
you. I want to come see you in Bali.
Yeah, so in
That would be
September, for
amazing.
example, yeah, so like in September, we have the spiritual awakening retreat, which is where we, open up, blast open, inner psychic abilities, how to be a medium, how to heal and communicate with animals, how to connect with your angels, how to work and heal with them. So it's all about coming back to what is natural to you,
Mhm.
how to really truly just embody that for it to become a lifestyle and not just a practice that you have to go sit down and breathe yourself into a good state in order to just get one message. It should be a lifestyle because that's our innate capacity and ability to be able to do all these things.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we have the women's retreat, so there's so many fun things that I love to do during and throughout the year.
It's amazing. What's the best place for people? Where should they find you? What's
So
your website?
metaphysicalanatomy.com, that's the one-stop place for everything.
Okay. And then you're also on all of the socials. Would it be on
Oh,
Metaphysical Anatomy
if
or?
so the social media is also on the website, but you can also find me on Instagram, Evette Rose Official, EvetteVideos.com. That's a fun direct URL to my YouTube videos where I share a ton of information that's free, especially the playlist, the transformational healing videos. I have a ton of videos there that will walk you through healing processes for
Oh,
different issues or areas in your life that you might have. A ton of psychosomatic videos. There's so much that I have. I mean, I sometimes forget everything that I have.
yeah. No, that's so amazing. I just want to thank you, Yvette. It's just such a pleasure meeting you and talking with you and you sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much also for this opportunity. And thank you for everyone also for listening and being open to receive.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I hit stop there.